Welcome to Emerald Live Educational Series. I'm Jill Cohen, Managing Director of Emerald Live, the webinar division of Emerald Media Group. Hope everyone is staying cool in this heat wave. Wow, I feel like I'm melting. I want to give out a huge thanks to our partners, Garden State Normal, Last Prisoners Project, Tribe Tokes Luxury CBD, and Cannabis Voters Project. For those of you who live in New Jersey, be sure to spread the word to vote yes on November 4th ballot. Let's get adult use legalized. Be sure to follow us on our social media pages. Joe will post our handles in the chat room. We also encourage you to network in the chat room. Feel free to share your LinkedIn profile and social media handles. Today we'll be talking about science behind cannabis. Before we get started with the panel, here's a quick clip on industry news from Jimmy Young.
Thanks, Jill. Here are today's news headlines from the whole new world of weed. The federal government and the Department of Justice continues to target cannabis businesses, and now they're suing the state of California's Bureau of Cannabis Control. The DOJ wants that state's bureau to comply with a DEA subpoena on the financial records of cannabis companies, including shipping manifests. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the DEA is blaming the FDA for holding up CBD regulations. Now, the FDA says it's the DEA's jurisdiction. Meanwhile, the unregulated CBD market is a mess. Last week, the FDA released a report that tested 147 random products that listed CBD as its main ingredient. 72 of those items contain more than the allowed 0.03% of THC in those products. The majority of the products all had different amounts of CBD in them in comparison to their labels. Now, on a side note, my opinion, of course, you could blame all this CBD confusion on Mitch McConnell's farm bill that was signed into law by that senator in December of 2018. The farm bill allows farmers to grow hemp, a product with a variety of uses that looks like its THC cousin, cannabis sativa. Now, you think maybe a little research into the cannabinoids that the cannabis sativa plant generates might have prepared those various government agencies from all this confusion at the federal and state levels? I think so. This is why cannabis is right in the middle of the political debate on Capitol Hill, where the Senate is holding up its second COVID-19 relief bill because they don't want any mention of cannabis in it. In the meantime, there's a new study out of Yale University's Journal of Biology and Medicine that, in conclusion, says, quote, marijuana's inhalation is associated with short-term reductions in depressive feelings, unquote. 96% of the 1,819 people who participated in this study experienced symptomatic relief from their depression that featured strains that were indeed THC dominant. No disrespect to the researchers here, but why do you think users call using cannabis getting high? This November, Arizona, Florida, New Jersey, New Mexico, South Dakota, and New York all have that legalization question on the ballot for the November 2020 election. Some companies are agreeing to actually shut down on election day so more people can vote, and still others are moving towards more mail-in ballots. And lastly, we have to talk about another reason why Black Lives Matter. The story of Sean Worsley is getting national attention, and it should. Worsley is a Purple Heart veteran of the Iraq War from Arizona who has a card for medicinal marijuana from his state. So when he and his fiancée were traveling through Alabama, they stopped to fill up at a gas station. Worsley was outside the car playing air guitar to his music coming from his vehicle. Well, that attracted the attention of an Alabama policeman who asked if he could search their car. Now, since Worsley had a medical card, he thought he was safe, but this, of course, was in Alabama. Sure enough, the cop busted Worsley and his fiancée, and now they're facing 5 years in jail. In Alabama, a black person is 4 times more likely than a white person to be arrested for cannabis. This is why cannabis is right in the middle of the civil rights debate in this country and has been for decades. Steve D'Angelo's Last Prisoner Project is trying to expunge the records of all those people who have been convicted of a cannabis crime, most for possession. Google it, support it, call your legislators, and most importantly, vote. I'm Jimmy Young for Pro Cannabis Media and We Talk News. Please subscribe, like, and share. I'm a very sensitive person. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Christina, for allowing me onto the show.
Thanks, Jimmy. We appreciate that. A round of applause for Jimmy.
Applause. No applause. Just like, share, and subscribe. Thank
and
you,
just
Jill.
so you know, he's the founder and president of Pro Cannabis Media and the original content creator and host of In the Weeds podcast. Please check the chat room for his credentials and follow him. Thanks again, Jimmy. I'd like to introduce Christina DeGiovanni, the CEO of Emerald Media Group. She will introduce our speakers and get the conversation started.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jimmy, very much. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm Christina DeGiovanni from Emerald Media Group, and I want to thank our panelists for being here as well. We have a lovely crew today. Tammy Pettigrew, founder of Cannabis, Cutie. We have Charles McElroy, founder of Goldleaf, and Emma Chasen, cannabis educator and industry consultant. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to just, go around, and Emma, maybe we'll start with you and just tell our audience a little bit about yourselves, maybe how you came into connection with cannabis.
Sure. So I have been working in the legal cannabis industry now for 5 years. I got my start in Portland, Oregon, and I am still based here. And I come with a rather academic background in medicinal plant research and ethnobotany, which is the study of the way in which indigenous peoples use medicinal plants. So I got that degree from Brown University and then went on to work for the Brown Oncology Research Group, where I conducted clinical oncology trials nationwide and just found, you know what, this is not exactly the area where I can make an impact, where I can bring plant medicine into a mainstream conversation around health and wellness. So packed up my car, drove across the country back in 2015, landed in Portland about a month before the early onset of adult use sales for cannabis here, and found my way into a dispensary, pharma, in Portland, and really noticed the lack of education and training, especially for our bud tender and retail cannabis personnel. And that is where I kind of focused all of my attention and energy in designing a curriculum on cannabis science and its purported effects to really scale across the industry, not only for our bud tenders to be able to provide better service to patients and consumers, but also for lay enthusiasts and industry professionals across the board.
Great. Thank you so much. Charlie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Charles McElroy. You can call me Charlie. I am the founder and chief creative at Goldleaf. And what Goldleaf does is a cannabis-specific design and education company. We try and make the science behind cannabis approachable, enjoyable, and we also kind of work to normalize and destigmatize the topic. So we tackle a lot of subjects from cultivation, medicinal, recreational, and we try to make them visually pleasing and also very informative and educational. We've had the pleasure of working with lots of great folks in the industry, including Emma on occasion. And if you want to see any of our work, the artwork or the journal series that we do, you can check out goldleaf.org or shopgoldleaf.com.
Thank you very much. Tammy, please tell our audience about yourself.
My name is Tammy Pettigrew. I go by the Cannabis Cutie on social media, and I am a cannabis educator in the space. I noticed when attending a lot of these industry events that the number one need was cannabis education. So I started creating 1-minute videos on my Instagram explaining science and education, history and laws, and that kind of spawned into my own cannabis curriculum. So I created a course for the cannabis entrepreneur and cannabis advocate to have a full understanding of the plant. I feel that we need to fully understand the history to understand why social equity is so important. I think if you have a business, you need to fully understand how to market your product by understanding the science behind cannabis. And I also went to the University of Miami where I got my MBA. So my next course will be basic business information to help the cannapreneur figure out what is necessary in order to have a successful business in the space.
Great. Well, there are many cannapreneurs out there, so I know we could all use as much help in the community as possible. So I want to start off with, I think question number one, before we even dive into the science, what is the difference between hemp and cannabis? And Tammy, I want to start with you.
So my perspective, and there's actually kind of two different views in the botany world, but my perspective is that they're not cousins, they're actually siblings. There was a story about a drug dog in Ohio that couldn't differentiate between cannabis and hemp, and someone got arrested for hemp. And that's because cannabinoids don't have scents. It is the hemp plant. The legal definition in the United States says that it's a cannabis plant that is only allowed to produce under 0.3% THC. And if it does, it becomes then a high CBD sativa plant. But the difference is what one is allowed to create and the other one is just allowed to freely synthesize whatever cannabinoids it wants to.
Thank you. Emma, would you like to maybe give us your perspective on the difference between hemp and cannabis?
Sure, yeah. So I definitely agree with you, Tammy, that hemp is cannabis, that it falls under that umbrella term. So when we talk about cannabis, as far as like classification terminology, cannabis is a genus and hemp falls underneath that umbrella of cannabis. And the reason why we have this almost arbitrary definition of the 0.03% THC being that threshold for hemp is actually because of a research scientist out of Canada, Dr. Ernest Small, who he was conducting botanical research and he was growing out a lot of different varieties of cannabis. And he found that these two groups kind of separated based on this chemotype or this chemical concentration of THC, where one group of genetics seemed to produce more than 0.03% THC and the other group of genetics seemed to produce less than 0.03% THC. So governments, both Canada and the United States, then made their determination, their legal definition of hemp based off of this research. However, it is important to note that even Dr. Small has come out and said on record that 0.03% THC is not the threshold for psychotropic activity. It's not that above that 0.03% THC, you're all of a sudden going to be high out of your mind, and below it, you're not. And so it's really important that there is a certain level of flexibility, especially if we're writing regulations around hemp versus cannabis in regards to like hemp-derived concentrates, that level of THC not be so strict because it's not the benchmark for psychotropic activity at all.
Charlie, what do you think?
Well, I'd wholly agree with everybody. There's not tons more to add to that conversation. I would just note that one thing that people often operate with is the look of the plant, especially where I'm from in kind of the Midwest, where the understanding isn't quite where it is on maybe the West Coast. So the looks of it do look pretty much like a sativa, and before that Canadian study you mentioned, that was kind of the thought is that hemp would be some sort of sativa variety. And that also is not like a clear-cut truth, simply because all indicas and sativas have been kind of homogenized over millennia. So there's not really very much purity in these genetics anymore. So kind of painting it with that brush is relatively inaccurate.
And so, you mentioned indica and sativa. So are you saying that there is no difference between the two, or that there is a significant difference between the two?
There's certainly a difference, but you're not going to really find pure cultivars anymore. They just never have existed in the modern times because everything has been crossbred, and all of the, I guess, like the black market breeding, or a lot of the genetic science that happened outside of the legal gaze has made it wishy-washy. So when you are maybe at a dispensary or something and you see something that says pure sativa, it's likely not a pure sativa, and that's not a good indicator of what you can expect. It's the chemical cocktail within that will kind of showcase what you can expect as far as the feels, not what that name says.
Emma, on the topic of indica sativa, can you talk to us a little bit about the psychoactivity with THC and how different strains might affect people differently, or what your thoughts are on behind that?
Sure, yeah. So I agree with Charlie that indica and sativa is not a good marker to predict experience. In fact, it is pretty much nonsensical, because what you're doing is ascribing definitions of species that refer to the morphological distinctions of a plant, so how a plant grows, and you're taking that information and saying, okay, well, there is consistent experience coming from this specific morphology, and that just doesn't hold up for a few reasons. One, at the time that these species were defined, at no point did the taxonomists smoke up a doobie of cannabis indica and write down oh my God, I'm so into couch right now. That never happened. They only noted that it grew short and bushy and had these dense flowers. And as Charlie was saying, even if at one point these species did correlate to really consistent experience, it does not matter now, because almost everything on the current market is hybridized. So there is a degree of mix in the indica and sativa genetics. And so when we go to look to predict experience, there are many different markers that we can look to, but the thing that makes the most sense is to look at those chemical compounds, not only cannabinoids like THC and CBD, but also the terpenes that we're actually ingesting, that are binding to our receptors, that are engaging with our enzymes and physiological factors to initiate a certain experience, whether it be therapeutic value or more in the mood of sleepy, silly, whatever it may be. It's important to note that every single person is unique. We all have a unique physiology. We all have a unique ECS. We all have a unique chemistry inside of us. And so that will, of course, influence the way in which we interact with these compounds, making cannabis medicine and cannabis consumption quite personalized and specific. And so it takes a lot of experimentation, using tools like microdosing, as well as being really conscious of set and setting so that you can figure out what works best for you.
Tammy?
They both hit it on the head, and I like that Emma brought up the fact that Lamarck and Linnaeus, the two botanists that were categorizing plants, never stopped and rolled up and smoked any plant. And a lot of people say, well, the terpenes that make you sleepy are typically in the indica plant, and the terpenes that give you energy are typically in the sativa plant. And again, there's no way to say, yes, that's correct, because we all individually react differently to terpenes, the same way that someone can drink an energy drink and just fall asleep. So it's kind of up to you. And I think with a lot of the testing that's happening and that's on cannabis packaging, it's kind of making the situation more confusing. I think we have to get back to the intuitive experience of actually using our senses to decide what we may or may not like. Your nose usually knows. So if you're trying to figure out what you like, start by smelling it, looking at it, feeling it, and then you'll kind of get an indication of what you like. And journaling. I use my Goldleaf journal to kind of write down how things make me feel. And that's how I figured out that sativas were putting me to sleep.
And so you hit on something that was really interesting, packaging, and the confusion that's coming out now. What are some of the major and minor cannabinoids? I know personally I've seen CBDN, THCA, and I know a surface level of what those mean. It hasn't been activated. Who'd like to jump in and kick that topic off?
Well, I would say that, with cannabinoids, there's one main cannabinoid, and that's the one that forms first, and then everything kind of comes out of that one. Or cannabinoids can transform into something else over time. So THC, over time, it's going to degrade to a cannabinoid known as CBN. And that cannabinoid is apparently just as powerful as some of the pharmaceutical sleep aids that are on the market now. CBC is another cannabinoid that's starting to get its shine, and it's actually much better at targeting anxiety than CBD is. And I'll let the other panelists take on some more.
Yeah, I think that both major and minor cannabinoids, I think that all of them play a role. If you have your kind of pulse on cannabis news, you'll have seen that Dr. Meshulam, who was the one who synthesized THC, he recently synthesized an analyte that was identical to CBDA. And so CBDA is the acidic form of CBD, and it exists in the raw cannabis plant. And so most people consume it by juicing the leaves and then drinking that juice. And the reason why he synthesized that cannabinoid was because even though it does not really bind to your cannabinoid receptors, it doesn't have any psychoactive potential, it is so much more bioavailable when we consume it through our gut. Because it is acidic, it's non-fat soluble. And so it is able to bypass the liver metabolism, enter into our digestive system, and then enact some amazing therapeutic value, at least as science suggests currently, in regards to anti-inflammatory action and pain relief, even more so than CBD or THC. So that's just one example of the way in which even an acidic, a raw cannabinoid that doesn't bind to our endocannabinoid receptors as we know it yet, is really quite powerful. And I'm a firm believer in the ensemble effect, aka the entourage effect, that all of these compounds, all these cannabinoids are working together to produce the most therapeutic value possible.
Yeah, just adding to that, Tammy, you had mentioned CBN. My own experiences, I'm very sensitive to CBN. I try to generally avoid it just because too much will kind of make me feel really dizzy. And I know a lot of folks probably think that it's like a clear-cut sedative. But CBN, I think, has that sedative quality only when the entourage or ensemble effect is at play. And you're also dealing with a little bit of still the active THC as well as the terpenes that have kind of aged out or are in the process of changing as well. And that can garner quite a different experience from the exact same plant or cultivar if enough time passes, or depending on where you get it, what the actual kind of chemical components and labs showed from the cultivar out of the gates.
Emma, you mentioned juicing, and that's really interesting because there are a lot of different ways that we can get the benefits of cannabis. Can we talk about the delivery methods? There's smoking, there's vaping, there's decarboxylating your cannabis edibles. Emma, what's your favorite delivery method? We'll start there, and why?
Oh, good question. It's hard to pick a favorite. Honestly, I'm an edible girl. I like to take a little bit, forget that I even took it, and then be like, oh, why do I feel so good right now? And remember that I took an edible. I will say though that with each consumption method comes a different bioavailable chemical reaction that you are allowing your body to undergo. So it will really be dependent on what type of experience you are looking for. I am a consistent cannabis user. I'm very experienced. I'm a higher doser, so edibles work really well for me. However, edible dose can be tricky because you are getting a much higher concentration of that 11-hydroxy THC if you're ingesting delta-9 THC because of liver processing. And that can be quite psychotropic and cause a much more intense high than smoking per se. Topical use is also a really great consumption method or way to engage with cannabis if you don't want to feel high at all. And if you're looking for kind of localized therapeutic relief and localized therapeutic value, it's really important to fully understand the way in which your body might react to a consumption method before engaging with that method. And even when you do decide to jump in and try one out, I still recommend to microdose so that you can make sure to really titrate your dose, offset any negative side effects, and then slowly but surely increase or decrease as needed.
Yeah, start low, go slow. Then
Exactly.
You can't go back. So, Charlie, what's your favorite delivery method?
I think I prefer vaporization. I'd love to get more into edibles, but I generally have adopted microdosing, and the vaporizer, I just feel like I have more control, and I can kind of have that immediate the immediate onset. So and it's a little cleaner than smoking. I don't think I've smoked since for quite a while. it's obviously not that healthy, and while vaporization still involves the lungs, I have pretty dialed in process as far as my control over the any additional sediments or whatever might come into play there. So I would probably say without hesitation I enjoy the vaporizer.
Okay, very cool. Tammy, how about yourself?
Well, for me, even though I have asthma, smoking is my favorite way to consume. I'm a mother, so sometimes I just need that quick, immediate effect. And then also when I vaporize, I notice that I can't breathe as well. So I like to just stick to the old True Blue, healthy rice paper joints or hemp wrap blunts. And then I also like to do sublingual methods. There are these tabs that kind of melt underneath my tongue, and I get the effects really quick. And that's also a fun way to consume other cannabinoids for me personally.
I think I've tried those before.
Yeah.
So, we know cannabis affects everyone differently, and, what we eat, how much we weigh, those can all play a factor. What are some of the KPIs if someone wanted to track their consumption and how it works for them? What are some of the things that they can be on the lookout for?
That's going to differ for a lot of people. I think that there are things you should always pay attention to in terms of your own daily rhythms. Sleep is a big factor, how much food you have in your tummy and general dietary habits. Other medications or other types of inputs that you're putting into your body can really kind of change what you experience. So keeping track of those are big, as well as, in my case, I mentioned the vaporizer. I only really vaporize flower. I agree that, vaporizing an extract is a little rough. So Tammy, I'm right there with you. But the temperature is a big thing for me. I try to keep it at lower temperatures. Again, for the microdosing, just kind of enjoying a little bit more of the different flavors. And then I also don't have that really strong high experience ever. It's just kind of like a slow purr. So I'll kind of pause there, but those are some of the big ones that have been impactful for me and some of my family and friends. So yeah, I'll kick the can over to one of the others.
Okay, Tammy, what other key points can people be on the lookout for if they're trying to track how cannabis affects them?
I think you should definitely check the harvest date on the packaging and who harvested that particular cultivar. People see a strain name and they automatically assume that they're going to get the same effect across the board. And that's just not the case. And I noticed that recently with one of my favorite strains that came back out, and I didn't have the same effects. And I noticed that it was grown by different growers. And different growers have different methods, and depending on the stressors and the amount of light that the plant has, there's going to be a different type of chemical reaction that she produces. So I definitely think that the date of harvest, who harvested it, where you bought it even is important, how much you paid for, and then if you can write down all the data that is on that packaging, I think that would help you to kind of understand what terpenes you might like or what ratios you prefer.
Thank you. And Emma, what kind of research and development can people try to do to track their cannabis?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Tammy and Charlie said. As much information that you can get about that product itself, including who grew it, as well as what cultivation methods they used, if it was grown organically, in soil, in hydro, in cocoa, whatever it may be, that I am a firm believer is going to influence the end experience for consumer. And any data about the chemical compounds, cannabinoid, terpene, as well as the dose that you've engaged in. So if you were smoking flower, how long was your inhalation? How long long did you hold it in, and how long did you wait before you did take another inhalation as well. And then the kind of final piece of the puzzle that I talk to people about when really tracking their own experience, and again, agree with Tammy that Goldleaf journals are an amazing way to do this, is to really take an inventory of your health. And I'm not even talking about just physical. I'm talking about emotional, spiritual, mental. Did you have a fight with your partner that day? Did you have a stressful day at work? How much water did you drink? Did you eat food? What kind of food did you eat? Did you eat fat? Like, really take a full inventory of yourself, of your body, because all of those different avenues of health will ultimately play into the end experience that you have.
I agree. You got a holistic look.
Mm-hmm.
So earlier we had talked about microdosing, and we hear that, with cannabis, sometimes with psilocybin. Emma, can you just give us a little background information on what a microdose is and maybe why people choose to go that route?
Sure, yeah. So a microdose is defined as a relatively standardized dose across the general population that won't necessarily give any uncomfortable side effects. And again, I say most, it's not all. We're talking plant medicine, so it's really hard to standardize where we're at now. For THC, a defined microdose is 2.5 milligrams of THC, and that is rather low. However, for some people that will cause a psychotropic experience, and it may even cause a little bit of uncomfortable side effects. However, it won't be anything that will be too abrasive, or it won't be anything that you really feel like you can't deal with. And then from there, you're able to increase or decrease your dose as needed. Typically, I advise in 1 milligram increments. And so it's a low and slow build. That's why we say start low, go slow. Really, the process is to get people to arrive at their optimal therapeutic dose, because it will be different for everybody. Cannabis is quite personalized. And so by doing a microdose and a regimented dose increase, we are helping to mitigate any of the more uncomfortable side effects that THC is known for.
Tammy, you mentioned using a sublingual. Would that be considered a microdose?
Yeah, depending on the amount. And Emma's right, that depends on who you are. If you're somebody that deals with a lot of pain, your microdose might actually be 20. But that's how I like to microdose as well. And my microdose number is around 10 or 15. And those little tabs that I take, they melt really quick. And then I start feeling effects within 15, 20 minutes, which is ideal.
And are those effects significantly different from if someone were to eat a full edible, like a full brownie? Obviously, it's less, but as far as the possible intoxication that they might feel?
So with the microdose, the whole goal is to not feel any kind of intoxication, but to just kind of take the edge off. So you're at that sweet spot right before you're about to feel high, but it's going to give you the therapeutic benefits so that you can function. If you're a teacher, you definitely don't want to be high with your students, but if you're really stressed out, you have a lot going on in your life, you could figure out what your number is, and it's a personal number, so that you can sit in that therapeutic zone.
Charlie, do you have any thoughts on microdosing?
Yeah, for my personal use, I use my best judgment as far as how much THC I am getting. Which varies wildly based on the particular flower, but generally I'm doing very small amounts with the vaporizer, and I've talked with other folks before about this, and they're always like, really, you're vaporizing flower to microdose? And it works for me okay. And yeah, like Tammy said, I do kind of aim for that barely feeling it. And I do struggle with autoimmune problems, and it has really worked well to kind of offset some of the symptoms of that condition, a lot better than the pharmaceuticals that I was, I've tried, and they were not very effective. So, this has worked for me personally, and I've found a level that works for me where I remain highly functional. I have that kind of wash of anxiety the anxiety kind of washes away a little bit, then generally I don't have the same type of inflammation throughout the day. So I'll sometimes utilize a little bit more in the evenings when my aim is to relax and go to sleep. But yeah, I mean, the secret sauce here is understanding the endocannabinoid system, and that everybody's is just so different, and there are so many different components that would affect it. So it makes like this whole subject really difficult to communicate to folks, because it's not like any other thing that you'll hear from a doctor or physician. You expect them to give you a hard line amount and a clear-cut path forward, and that's just not how cannabis is going to work. You have to experiment on your own. You're your own guinea pig, and the good part is that you really can't hurt yourself.
What about people that are anxious about trying cannabis, or they're nervous because there is no clear path? What if they feel like they've gone too far, they've smoked too much, they ate too much? Is there anything they can do to reverse it? Can they smoke CBD? Can they take vitamin C? I'm going to let anyone jump out there that wants to give this a shot. How could we reverse it if someone goes a little too far?
There are so many methods. CBD actually is going to stop that THC from breaking down, but you might have a longer effect. You could try caffeine, you could take a nap. There are products out on the market that will undo your high. There's a terpene called pinene, but I wouldn't recommend any more cannabis consumption if you're too high.
Emma, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like drink a lot of water, get cozy, make sure you're in a good space. It'll ride through. I tell people that at this point, we don't have a lethal dose of cannabis. So cannabinoid receptors don't exist on the part of the brain that controls our heart, that controls our lungs, that controls our brain function. And so cannabis cannot shut down your heart. It can't shut down your lungs. It can't shut down your brain. You may feel like your heart's beating out of your chest like crazy, but you're not going to die. So just like keep that mantra. I also really talk people through when they're having like overdose freakouts, exactly what's happening in your physiology. So your system is getting flooded with THC, and actually at the last time of inhalation, or at the last point at which you consumed, if you're smoking or vaporizing or inhaling, the peak experience happens at 10 minutes, around 10 minutes. So after you get through that, it's all downhill from there, baby. So just ride it out. You'll be okay. Like Tammy said, you could take some CBD, but it may prolong the experience, especially if you took a lot of THC to kind of get to that place of paranoia and overdose anxiety, but it can kill you, so you'll be okay.
Good to know. Charlie, do you have anything you want to add to that, or?
No, Emma, you said it can't kill you, right?
Yes, with a T.
Yeah, right. That T evaporates here on Zoom. No, I wouldn't add much, except I think laying down, getting cozy, trying to sleep it off, and drinking a whole bunch of water is, a good step. But there's no like clear-cut miracle pill to make it go away, just like if you had too much to drink or something. So, just reminding yourself that, you will be okay, this will pass. And, if you fall asleep, then you won't be thinking about it.
I will add, just don't go to the hospital. It'll be one of the most expensive naps of your life. They're going to just let you go to sleep and maybe give you an IV to stay hydrated.
It would be a learning experience. All right, well, I want to ask one last question, and then I want to open it up to our guests. If anyone out there has a question that you'd like asked, please type it into the chat, and we will do our best to get through all of it. My last question for you all, though, is full spectrum versus non-spectrum. Emma, would you like to start this one?
Yeah, definitely. So I am a big proponent of full spectrum products. And full spectrum, it means that in the concentrate or extract that is used to formulate a cannabis product, that the extractor has undergone methodology to really retain the unique fingerprint of the plant material. And typically that means low temp and long time. So you are not damaging those terpenes, which are incredibly volatile and can easily be degraded through thermal degradation. And so to me, that employs the entourage or ensemble effect that is all of the compounds working together to produce the most medically efficacious response possible through synergistic relationships. And a synergy is when we have one compound plus another compound actually equals a multiplicative response. And so it's not just additive there. You can also have distillate or isolate on the market, and those are different stages of refinement of a product. So distillate is an extract that has gone through a distillation, usually a steam distillation that requires some heat to fraction off compounds, usually in regards to targeting higher concentrations of cannabinoids. However, you'll sacrifice your terpenes. With an isolate, you're looking at just one singular isolated compound, CBD or THC. And this is all to say that, of course, like all of these products may be therapeutic for your specific experience that you're looking for. However, if we're looking for the most therapeutic value possible, I'm a fan of full spectrum.
There's also broad spectrum, and the difference there is it's kind of a full spectrum approach, except they will take another step to fully remove the THC, and then isolates. And this kind of opens the door for like what Jimmy was saying about the regulation of the CBD industry and how it's just like the Wild West. I've seen so many companies touting whichever process that they're using, whether it be isolate, full spectrum, broad spectrum, as being like the best for, this reason or this reason. And, unless there's some kind of updated research on what makes it the best, I believe that, we're still in the realm of everybody's best is different. So you kind of have to try them out and see which works for you.
Tammy, do you have any thoughts on full spectrum versus non-spectrum or broad spectrum?
Full spectrum is definitely my preference, just because you have this plant and it has so many chemicals, and with isolates, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take one member of this party and ask it to perform everything, and it just can't stand alone. And then even with CBD, I prefer my CBD to be full spectrum because, again, they work well together. When you try to take away some parts to satisfy, laws or whatever it may be, it's not going to be as effective because, again, you're taking its important players and you're saying no. And that's why some people have low effects when they try CBD and they say it's not working. I would say isolates probably are not going to work, and then broad spectrum may work, but full spectrum is going to be your best bet. And unfortunately, a lot of companies are just using these words for marketing right now, is what I can kind of gather.
Yeah, I think a big part of it, though, is somebody would probably choose an isolate, which I've seen marketed as THC-free, because, and I'm not an expert on this part, but it won't show up on drug tests. Like, there's no chance that an isolate of CBD would cause you to fail a drug test, whereas a full spectrum product could possibly. Personally, I think you should update the drug test to not include cannabis, but I think that's kind of an attribute that is why somebody would choose those, which, makes sense. If you live in a state or work for a company like, I don't know, Spectrum or somebody who's drug testing you all the time, you've got to be aware of that for your own kind of livelihood.
Right. There's politics at play. All right, so we've got a couple questions here. I'm gonna start. Let's see. Question about terpenes. Are these experienced through interaction with cannabinoid receptors just like cannabinoids, or do terpenes interact with the body in a different way? This one's from Heather.
That's a good question. So there was actually a recent research study that I believe is from New Zealand that talked about this, and they found that terpenes do not have much influence on cannabinoid receptors. There's been previous research that showed that beta-caryophyllene has a limited binding efficiency to the CB2 receptor, which THC and CBD, it's important to note, also have rather low binding affinity for this receptor. And so beta-caryophyllene may be able to modulate some immune function, which is what the primary responsibility for that receptor is. However, the terpenes can interact in many different ways. I mean, they may make cannabinoids more bioavailable. They can interact with many of the inflammatory factors in our body, like PPAR gamma and TNF alpha. linalool, which is a terpene found in lavender, also influences liver enzymes. And so even if you're eating an edible, terpenes, yes, they're volatile, they may get degraded, but that linalool may influence liver enzymes and therefore may influence your experience with the cannabinoids there. And so there are many different ways that terpenes can interact besides the cannabinoid receptors. Limonene can interact with our serotonin and dopamine receptors to influence the brighter mood of the experience. So there's a lot more going on than just the CB1 and CB2 receptors.
Great. Okay, this one's from Sarah. Besides CBN acting as sedative, what cannabinoids or terpenes are most promising to explain the experience traditionally described as indica or sativa?
That one again is going to be based on you. The rep on myrcene is that it's going to put you to sleep, but that's kind of what I use during the day. And I use sativas usually at night because I feel there's a terpene that I'm super sensitive to called terpinolene. It's supposed to give you energy, but for me, I feel it makes me really sleepy. So there's no way to really tell unless you try it. Like Charlie said, when he had CBN, it wasn't necessarily that he was sedative. And somebody also said, does anyone find CBD slightly depressive? Yeah, if you take too much, you can be an emotional zombie. Absolutely.
Okay. And I'm going to jump over to the Q&A box. Sorry about that, directing everyone to the wrong. What is a typical dose by milligram weight for CBD isolate powder?
This is again really personal. Sorry that we don't have better information for you. It's not like allopathic medicine, which is so what we're used to, right? Where we like go buy ibuprofen and the standard dose is to take 2 pills and then your pain's gonna go away. There's really no standard dose because it's plant medicine. There's actually quite a wide dose window for THC. I've seen papers from Harvard that the dose window is between 4 milligrams to 4,000 milligrams of THC, which is insane. For CBD, it can be even wider. I mean, you'll find some doctors who say, start with 800 milligrams of CBD, which to me seems insane because some people are really sensitive with 5 milligrams of CBD. So all to say, it's incredibly personal and you must experiment with yourself. A good starting dose, generally I give people, is between 10 to 20 milligrams, though be very prepared that that may do nothing for you.
For me, it's about 10 milligrams. Then I'm doing pretty good. All right. Does anyone out there have any more questions that they'd like to ask? Otherwise, I will turn it over to Jill, or if there's anything the panelists would like to say and inform the audience, feel free to jump in here as well.
I have a question. I'm just curious, there's all this new reports coming out about the effects of CBD on COVID-19. What are your thoughts on that?
There's just no way there's enough research to back that up. I think that's dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, cannabinoids are good, and more than just CBD and THC are really good at boosting your immune system. So, I mean, with any virus, cannabis is going to help, protect you. But there's no research, definitive research that says yes or no. So it's too early to say.
Yeah, I mean, we know so little about COVID as it is, and we also know very little about the way then that cannabis interacts with COVID. And like Tammy said, I mean, there is like anti-inflammatory benefit and antiviral benefit to these compounds, but we just do not have enough research yet to be able to talk about it.
Right, and there's been a lot of concern, with respiratory infections and smoking cannabis during COVID, can it actually hurt you and make it worse? So, but I'm sure it's not good to smoke anything while you're sick. So. Any other questions out there? Otherwise, Jill, I will turn it right back over to you.
I've got one quick. I'm just curious. Tammy, you said you really enjoy smoking. Do you smoke when you're sick?
No, typically when I'm sick, I don't, just because hydration is an issue.
Okay.
I'll kind of microdose edibles, but if I'm sick, I'm not even functional enough to use cannabis.
Okay, gotcha. I will say I often do use it when I'm sick in higher doses. It seems to, I don't know, alleviate a little bit of body aches and stuff like that. But, it also probably exacerbates the situation a little bit. I'm just curious. I'm always fascinated by how people handle themselves during those times.
Well, I do have an autoimmune disorder in my ear. So whenever that triggers, my neurologist has given me Zofran, but that does not help with nausea. So then I'll have to smoke when I'm sick, just so that I'm not throwing up everywhere. But yeah.
Cool.
Emma, do you consume when you're sick?
I do. I do consume edibles to help with sleep so that it takes away the discomfort, but I'm right there with you guys where sometimes I can't really tell if it's helping or hurting at the particular point in time. I just know that it makes me feel like emotionally better, which there's value in that, right?
Yeah, you can deal with the discomfort of
Exactly. And just like watch TV and like be a zombie, for a couple of days and not feel so bad about it. And that helps in its own right.
We have one last question from Howard Harris. Does anyone have experience with CBG? Does anyone have experience with curing cancer and cannabis?
CBG is awesome. I mean, I love it. It is the mother cannabinoid, we say. CBGA, technically its acidic form, is the first cannabinoid that's made in the plant. So the cannabinoids THC, CBD, and CBC differentiate down from that cannabinoid. There has been some recent research, preliminary scientific evidence, that shows that CBG may be helpful in modulating the cancer response, the cell cycle, and reducing tumor growth. However, when we talk about cannabis and cancer, especially from my time in oncology research, there are so many different kinds of cancer, and each type of cancer has its own pathway that it is going down. And so it's really hard to say cannabis is great for cancer. Cannabis definitively is really helpful at offsetting the side effects of chemotherapy. And we've also seen that cannabis administration combined with chemotherapy can make chemotherapy more effective at reducing tumor size and slowing the spread of cancer and even helping people to fully recover in remission. However, we are nowhere near the place of saying that cannabis can cure cancer at all. And even when it comes to cannabis effects on cancer, like I said, there are so many different types of cancer that it's really, really hard to talk about that with a large degree of scientific evidence behind it.
Great, thank you. Well, I'd like to stay on schedule, so we're coming to an end at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock East Coast time, that is. So I want to conclude our webinar and thank all of you for joining us. We really appreciate your time, Emma, Tammy, and Charlie, and Jimmy too. Our next event will be on August 6th. It'll be our 420 speed networking event. So keep a lookout for email invitations and our social media posts. Again, thank you to our partners, Garden State Normal, Last Prisoners Project, Tribe Tokes, Cannabis Voters Project. Be sure, New Jerseyans, vote November 3rd, not 4th, I said earlier. Sorry for misspeaking. November 3rd. And don't forget to follow us on social media. Hugs and tokes, everyone.
Guys, thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.